Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Nicole Mahoney, and I'm CEO of Travel Alliance Partnership. We're also known as TAP. I'm also known as the podcast host of Destination on the Left, which is a show focused on creativity and collaboration in the travel and tourism industry. And what better example of collaboration than what our panelists are here to do and talk about today. Welcome to our first in a series of community conversations that TAP will be hosting in 2025. The idea for this program came after ABA, American Bus Association's Marketplace that happened in the beginning of February, because during the Marketplace is when we first started to really talk about and hear about the tariffs and the potential of the tariffs, especially with our Canadian neighbors. And so when we got back from Marketplace, the TAP team was trying to think about how we can remain forward focused and be helpful to our travel community. And we realized that there's things that happen that are out of our control, and that we really only can make an impact on the things we can control, right? How we react to something or don't react to something. And so we came up with this idea to host this conversation, and these wonderful panelists agreed to join us. And really, we hope that today's conversation is the start of a conversation and not the end, and that it's an ongoing forward-focused collaboration between the whole travel community, but specifically talking today focused on US and Canadian cross-border travel. Also, attendees of the webinar cover a broad base of the travel ecosystem. We have DMOs with us, attractions, accommodations, tour operators, travel advisors, freelance travel writers, industry associations, and consultants. And so I love that so many members of this community find this subject to be important and are open to learning together today. Now, when you registered, you were asked if there were any questions that you had for our panelists. And the questions that we collected seemed to come in three general themes. They were, what should we expect for cross-border travel in the coming months or years? How can we collaborate across borders to help encourage travel? And should we continue to invest in the Canadian-US market? And if so, what should our message be? So it would take many hours to get through all the questions that were submitted. So as a group, we've identified 10 that we hope to get through in 50 minutes, which I know is going to be a challenge, but our panelists are up to the task. And we will end with any questions that come through the chat. We're hoping to have time at least to address one or two questions that come through the chat. So feel free to enter your questions into the chat as we go. So let's get into this discussion. Panelists, thank you so much for joining me today. And let's start by having you introduce yourself. And for context, when you introduce yourself, tell us why cross-border tourism is important to you. And I'm going to just go round robin on my screen. So Catherine, you are first on my screen, so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first.
My name is Catherine Dawson March. I am the effective travel editor at the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's national newspaper. And well, cross-border travel, it's hard to ignore the US, you're so close. And there's a lot of great stories. So that's why I want to know more about it and eventually get back to running stories about it.
Fabulous, thank you. And Chris, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Mitchell. A real pleasure to be on this panel with all of these other bright, wonderful folks, and grateful to share some of my own opinions as well. I started my first website, Travelingmitch, in 2010. Since then, launched a handful of other websites, mostly focused on Canadian travel, but I also do a lot of work with communities and conferences. I'm the director of TBEX, which is a conference for travel creators. I run a community in Toronto called the Toronto Blogger Collective, and very, very invested in this creator space. Just so I'm not taking too much time on this panel, I'll just say, I think my cross-border tourism perspective is just that I've always personally had a tremendous amount of my contents come from visiting the US. I'm in Bradenton, Florida right now, where my wife's family has a huge imprint. And I think it's just important to recognize that there are local stories and businesses everywhere that are also caught in this. And so, we have to think deeply about how we can respond and think about all these things.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Corey.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. My name is Corey Fram. I'm Director of Tourism for the Thousand Islands International Tourism Council. That is a EMO, Destination Marketing Management Organization, located on the Northern New York State side of the Thousand Islands, but we're unique in the DMO space in that we provide services to both the US and Canadian sides of our shared destination. This is a binational destination, and we've always supported it that way. So this, of course, is top of mind for us and will be for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. And Vince.
Hi, everyone. Vince Accardi. I'm the president of the Ontario Motorcoach Association and Motorcoach Canada. We're Canada's group travel and motorcoach association, and our members make up most of all the suppliers, tour operators, and everyone that make up the group travel industry. Thank you for having me here, and it was great to see so many of our members on today's call as well. Of course, the US is Canada's biggest source market for tourism, and Canada is US's biggest source market for the visitor economy. So, and we've collectively, both our nations have had decades of supporting each other's tourism economy and being very closely connected and with deep roots and connections. So it's vital that our tourism sector continues to support each other and work collectively. And this is one example of what we can be doing and having sessions like this to talk about what's going on. But we gotta, I think like we've done before, we've ridden out some challenges and we're gonna face future challenges. And this is one that we're gonna make it through, but we just need to stick together.
Absolutely. And Richard.
Well, Nicole, I'm pleased to be here. Richard Arnold, President of Atlantic Tours Limited, located in Nova Scotia, Canada. We specialize in all of Atlantic Canada. Our biggest business is bringing the world to see Atlantic Canada, including the American market, but we also take Atlantic Canadians to see the world, which includes the US as well. And as Vince said, family ties run deep in Atlantic Canada, between Atlantic Canada and New England for sure. Our border across Canada, open all of these years, no issue going back and forth. So much of what we do is tied to each other. And I always say, as a Nova Scotian, if you're especially from Cape Breton Island, one of the first things you did after you graduated was probably be a nanny in New England for a year or two. So the family ties do run deep. And this whole situation, doesn't need to happen, but it is. And right now, I think Canadians' feelings are hurt, and we can't understand why the current administration has specifically targeted us. And so that's kind of, I think, where the issue is lying more with Canadians. It's more with the administration, more so than our American friends and neighbors and family to the south. And so we're trying to react in a way that, the only way that we can react is with our dollars to try to figure out how drastically this is going to affect Americans as well as Canadians. So thank you for including me. As a tour operator, I'm very passionate, and 36 years now in the tour business and hotel before that. So certainly understand the situation over the years when we've had other challenges.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect segue actually into this first question, which is going to be for all of our panelists. And Catherine, maybe we'll start with you on this one. From your viewpoint, what is Canadian sentiment towards travel to the US? And do you think it will have an impact on travel in this year, 2025 or beyond?
Well, as Richard just mentioned, Canadians are going to vote with their dollars because that's what they have left, basically. They're angry. I mean, as of this morning, it's full-on trade war, and Prime Minister was on the radio this morning, said, just calling out Canadians. I think the wording was, we have to do everything possible to choose Canada. So like the whole country is on Team Canada. So if that means changing their travel plans, that's what's happen. So it's unfortunate and sad. But it is sort of the reality that we're dealing with, and I'm dealing with even from an editorial perspective, like what stories are we running, where are we signing, where are we sending, are we looking at long leads, very long leads? But so that's sort of what we're sort of stuck right now in this reaction industry is. So.
And Vince, what are you seeing?
Well, I got to say, the world is really watching what's going on politically between our two nations and other nations across the globe. So global consumers of goods and of travel products are going to make decisions based on their own beliefs. So right now, Canadians are using our purchase power to show, dissatisfaction with the political climate that we find ourselves in. However, I got to say, like I said before, the tourism industry is resilient, and with continued investment and targeted messages and compassion in markets that you want to stay connected and engaged with, we're going to get through this. But we have to be careful on how we market to our primary markets, how we talk to them, what we do to engage them. But most importantly, we have to stay invested.
Absolutely. And Corey, as a two-nation destination, what are you seeing and what are you hearing?
Well, that negative sentiment has certainly amplified, particularly in the last 4 to 6 weeks. And it's like Richard said, the only way to react is with our dollars. Catherine used the phrase, vote with our dollars. We know that sentiment can drive and will drive decisions. So, I fully expect that Canadian visitation to the U.S. is going to go down. The tricky part for us right now in our destination is we can't measure that. As we've done outreach to our operators, we haven't seen a substantial loss yet. So we're still looking at the potential. And I fully am prepared and expect that it is going to happen. So it's really a matter of being prepared and then trying to gauge what that loss could look like.
Yeah, so true. And Richard, have you seen any changes in Canadian travelers' preferences or interest in U.S. trips?
Well, I think there's going to be less of an immediate change at the moment, because a lot of people are already perhaps prepaid or have their winter vacations done. So places like Florida and all of that are already completed. People may already still be there, but this is the time of the year you're thinking about rebooking for next year and those kind of things. That I think is where the impact is going to come, is in a longer term presence, and then we'll see what happens in the next week here, now that things have started today, because we weren't really sure of what was going to happen. The date kept getting pushed forward, and so was it really going to happen? And the whole idea behind it initially was they wanted a stronger border, and so us Canadians have jumped on board to strengthen that border, and even where the issues really weren't ours, we embraced them like they were. And so from a travel perspective at this point, I'm not getting any bookings on my outbound. So, going into the US, I'm not having a great amount of hope, but we've not gone ahead and canceled anything. We'll use our usual decision making, that we usually do 60 to 45 into 30 days prior to going, to see what the true sentiment is. But the bookings haven't been coming in from that perspective. I'm more concerned about the bookings from my company's perspective coming into Canada, because it's a very, very important market for us, and Canadians have always still been welcoming, and I don't see any difference. Like I said, our issue is not with Americans, it's with something that we can't control. It's a decision made at the top. And so hopefully we'll still be welcoming and all of those things. I will caution our American friends that are listening. Canadians do not find it funny that we're expected to be the 51st state. And even good friends of mine send messages in that regard. And I'm reminding them that as an American, you're very proud to be American, and we're very proud to be Canadian. And you'd feel the same way if we said you're going to be a next province in Canada. That doesn't become joking after a while. So, there's little things like that from a rhetoric standpoint that I think, we can be a little more respectful of. But I don't think there's issues between Canadians and Americans at the moment. It's just some of the stuff that's perceived as a fun joke. It really isn't a fun joke to Canadians at the moment.
I would agree. I was skiing in Utah in February, and that was the conversational opener on the chairlift. As soon as somebody found out I was from Canada, and it was like, how do you explain that you just basically, it's insulting. And that's the main, aside from the tariffs, it's government play. It's like insulting the country. So that's really what people are angry, I think, more than almost as much as tariffs. When everyone, like both sides, there's going to be job losses on both sides of the border unless tariffs stop. And so that's a problem. But as Richard, it's funny you're worried about Americans coming to Canada. I would have thought that at 40% off, the whole country should be like, a windfall for Americans.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And to me, Canada is on special, and to me, I've been disappointed that Canadians at the hockey games, sports events aren't always indicative of everything else in life, but the booing of the U.S. anthem or back and forth, I think that's kind of started in Canada with them doing that. It's very un-Canadian. I'm very disappointed in that, and I apologize for that. That's not who we are as a country. But as you said, Catherine, I think our feelings have just been hurt, and we're trying to figure it out, and with that comes, a change in temperament.
Right. Chris, I'm curious what you're seeing, especially with your social media followers, and how are people reacting in your world?
Yeah, so obviously I'm very well connected to the a lot of Canadian creators and a lot of US creators. I've seen Canadian creators use their platforms to share their frustration. And I think it's probably because they feel like they have a platform and they want to validate some of those feelings. It's difficult because I think about there's this very specific moment we're all dealing with that's part of a much larger narrative. I mean, for context, I'm working on a project on my grandfather's war letters right now, and he's speaking about fighting side by side with Americans, and all this stuff. And I think we get into this moment where we're focused on this specific issue with, in many cases, it's the person with the loudest microphone, and then the phone blows up with all these notifications and all that stuff. And I guess, I see a lot of people who are sharing that frustration because of the uncertainty and saying, I will or will not travel to the US or what have you. For me, I'm trying to do my part to dive a little bit deeper. I mean, for context, Richard, tomorrow night we're going to one of the most famous restaurants around the area, and it's run by a gentleman who started it 30 years ago from Nova Scotia. So, these are other stories. The other thing too that I want to acknowledge is that ultimately I'm my own editor as well. I get to make the choices over what content that I'm going to be sharing and how I'm going to do that. It can be a little bit harder for other spaces in media because there's a different demand and I think what we're going to realize through this is that and through just talking about this, nobody's going to have a magic answer for this. It's going to be about continuing dialogue and open communication and trying to work together on both sides of this respective fence, which in many cases has not been built by us.
Yeah, I would agree. Yesterday, for example, in my office, there was 2 or 3 beautiful messages that came in from past American travelers, apologizing for what's going on right now and encouraging us to stay who we've always been, a warm, inviting people. And, and as you said, we've always fought together. We've always, when California was in need with firefighting equipment, immediately the provinces engaged and went to California. That's, when we had the Halifax explosion in the early 1900s, it was Boston that did so much. And that big Christmas tree we take down every year, we're so proud to say thank you for all of the assistance. We've always been family. And I think for the first time in our history, to think that America's taking a different stand in the world setting, and that may be a different view than Canada has. So, it's a lot of reckoning at the moment. And once again, as I said, I don't think it's an American view necessarily. It's a leadership voice that's being conveyed. And so we've got to keep reminding ourselves of what we can control. We can control those great relationships, continue those great relationships with the people that are part of our societies. And
right. So I want to go over to Corey because Corey, yesterday when we were doing our walkthrough, you had some perspective in terms of how we've gone through lows, ups and downs in the past, right? In terms of sentiment from our Canadian neighbors and how that impacts travel. So what have we experienced in the past, and what can we learn from those slow periods?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. There's a distinct pattern whenever challenges are placed on cross-border travel between the United States and Canada. We first saw it post 9/11. For August 2001, weeks before the terrorist attacks in the United States, the border crossing outside my window here, we had close to 300,000 crossings. August of the following year was down around 260. When we look at pre-COVID restrictions, 2019, month of August, 196,000 crossings. Now that dipped to 4,000 in 2020, right, because the border was essentially closed. But even last year, our August numbers were 168. And what we know is that we never quite rebound to where we were. And even though those logistical challenges have been eliminated, for example, the Arrive Can app is no longer required. There's been 20 plus years of that adjustment and a new generation understanding that a passport is necessary. There's a sentiment piece there that I think really drives some of that decrease, where you have folks who they've decided they're not crossing anymore. The passport requirement is not for them. There's a perception out there that one country or the other barred me during COVID because they thought I was sick and I can't come, so I'm not going back. And so my takeaway from it is that when that happens, that negative sentiment piece can really drive in a lot of further complications. So somebody who might have been visiting the United States from Canada, and now they've decided not to, they may have a new favorite place. And so I think it's important for all of us in the travel industry to realize that there's going to be a short-term piece to this, the actual impact, but there's most likely, based on the history of the last 25 years and before that, going to be a long-lasting impact. Who are those folks who are just not going to travel now because of that negative sentiment piece? And that's not just tariffs. That goes into 51st state rhetoric and those kind of stuff that really just drive us apart and are not what we are about in the travel industry.
Vince, how about you from where you are? What have you seen in the past, and what do you think we can learn from that?
Yeah, to some of Corey's data, certainly over time there's a shift in visitations. Overall visitations are growing, but land border crossings have never really responded to pre-crisis times. Now, right now our borders are the way they have always been. They're open, they're easy to cross. Hopefully there's a good pickup on passports, which are required. But we are, over the last little bit, we have been seeing growth, especially on the group tourism side of things. And this is a big hiccup, but we will get through it. And I think as long as we can, as an industry, continue to advocate together to our governments how important our industry is, what the economic drivers are, how many jobs we create, why they have to keep borders open and easy to get through for our friends and our neighbors. This is a big hiccup, but we can get through it, and we just have to make sure that group tourism, is put out there as an important economic driver and a job creator for both of our economies, and make sure that our governments are working with us and not unintentionally harming us.
Well, one of the things that always comes through for me is a little musical set in Gander, Newfoundland, called Come From Away. And what tells a better family story between our countries when 9/11 happened and the world had to come to the aid of all of the travelers that were not able to go back to the U.S. airspace. I think of that great story, and we have to remember those kind of things. Those relationships can be back to normal, but the rhetoric may take a bit longer. I'm trying to stay positive here and think of all of those great opportunities where we've helped one another out.
Absolutely. And so, Chris, I'm curious, what can destinations and, like I said, we have a variety of actually attendees here on this webinar from all different parts of the ecosystem, but what can we do to communicate with and attract Canadian travelers during this time? Like, what can we say? How can we relate to them? How can we remind them that, yes, we are a welcoming place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's, firstly, just to echo, I think a lot of what everyone has said has been very well said. And just to quickly talk about the last comment there, my Ontario website and Canada website are doing quite well right now because people are looking to travel provincially and nationally, but that's not at the expense of the US travel, which I primarily focus on the other website. I haven't seen a downtick yet, and I'm sure things will be in flux right now. But I guess the main thing I want to point with everything that everyone's been saying is this is a moment in time where we're in flux, but it's under a broader narrative with a very strong story. This is an unfortunate paragraph that's added to a beautiful novel. And so we need to remember that. And there will be more paragraphs that we don't particularly love, but hopefully we can edit those. That's a metaphor for another day. But what can destinations do to communicate with and attract Canadian travelers? Well, I think first and foremost, I mean, in the same way that Catherine and Richard were talking about the frustration we feel about the comment of 51st state sort of stuff, I mean, the opposite would be without our Canadian visitors. I'm in Florida right now. There's a lot of Canadians. My wife's parents live here. You know, they're part of the fabric of this community and society. And I think there's a lot of stories like that. As far as what a destination can do, I think it's largely about communicating to Canadian visitors and just underlying that they're still very much welcome. There's a lot to do here. I think about from a marketing standpoint, focusing on those local businesses with stories that are larger than national politics, probably a good idea. You know, focusing on stories that are human in nature, not just, hey, look what's here, but hey, look who's building this, look who runs this restaurant. Those more local stories help us humanize this and empathize with our neighbors through all this. And I think something Richard's been saying throughout that I think is really important to remember is I don't think the average Canadian, especially in this industry, is saying, oh, the US is this way. We're saying this is what the US administration is currently doing in the face of what we know to be true about the US, our neighbors, and some of my closest friends and colleagues that are from the US. I think it's also worth noting that it's not just Canadians that are frustrated. There are a lot of Americans. A lot of my American creator friends are really frustrated by the situation because they don't, what's being amplified in quick snippets on our phones is not what they want communicated either. So I think those are some of the things that we're talking about or worth remembering.
Well, I think of the good news story of, I think it was a border community to BC in Washington State, where the little ferry came into the American town and they were all out to make them feel welcome, cheering, saying how important or interlocked their communities were and how important this was to both sides. It was heartwarming to me to see that on the news.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Does anybody else have any other comments on that one before we go on to the next question? All right, this next one's for you, Vince. How are Canadian tour operators feeling about bringing groups to the US? And kind of similar to what we were just talking about, what can we do as destinations and attractions to ease concerns and support their travel plan?
Yeah, from a OMCA, MCC member perspective, what we've been hearing is our tour operators are very much responding to what their consumers are, what they're hearing from their consumers, what they're buying, what their consumers' concerns are. Some had immediate impacts, some heard some pushback, others not so much. You know, Richard's on the call here today. He can give you some perspective there and is a great supporter of OMCA. But I would encourage all of the destinations, all the suppliers on the call, attractions, to connect with your tour operators. Like, go and have a conversation to see what they're hearing, what can be done collectively as like in a partnership and strategically to show support for those planned itineraries that might be still out in the market. Maybe there's ways that they can help send messages to consumers or like stories like Chris talked about, you know, some content that will resonate with them, that will raise the destination and the experiences beyond the politics of it. But really the tour operators are the tightest connection to the consumers at the end of the day. They're the ones that are going to be hearing it on their social. They're the ones that phones are lighting up when things happen. And they're the ones that are going to have a great feel of what their consumers want. So it's those connections, it's working together. And it's, you know, making sure that we're positive and we're strategic and that we're finding supportive initiatives so we can continue to send these trips both ways and make sure people feel good about their buying decisions.
Absolutely. And kind of to follow on that, Richard, you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of the trips that you have that maybe aren't selling right now, but you're going to treat them as you do all of your trips and make your decisions as you get closer. What can U.S. destinations and attractions that are a part of those itineraries, how can they collaborate on messaging with you to help keep those Canadian visitors, coming so that they know they are welcome?
Well, I guess we may be looking for a little bit more time to make some of those decisions. But I think also good news stories from the areas that we're going are always helpful. To me, we're letting our customers drive the bookings. We're still doing our advertising like we normally would for our outbound as well as our inbound. So nothing has really changed there. Now, I guess we're always cognizant of, we've had no one phoning us to say, why are you offering trips to America or any of that kind of stuff. There's not certainly been any push in that direction. We're offering the trips as great vacations, and most of our, I should say almost all of our hours are two-nation vacations, because when you leave from Nova Scotia, you're always spending some time within Canada as well as the US. So if we're doing a trip to Niagara Falls, for example, one of our directions is going to be the St. Lawrence Seaway in that corridor, and New England will be the other. So to me, great itineraries and great trips are still great trips. And so we're not taking a position ourselves on any of that. We'll let the bookings fall where they may. But my heart is saying, based on the current situation, that I'm not expecting the bookings to be as strong as they usually would be with that sentiment. And we'll see what the next few weeks really have in store. Is this really going to happen for a long period of time? It happened today, but Americans don't want to be hurt internally either. And with the lack of understanding at the top, I'm certainly not in the automobile business or that kind of thing, but I don't think a lot of North Americans or Americans understand that vehicles and parts go back and forth on a regular basis to complete a car. So there's, each time it goes back and forth, if the tariffs are going in place, obviously when it hits everyone's pocketbooks, that's where there may be a bigger pushback like the last time around. So, my hope is that, the point will be made here, and maybe this will be short-lived, and then there'll be bigger fish to fry in the world, and we'll be left alone. But it doesn't appear that way at the moment.
Would it, Catherine?
Yeah, would it make sense to reach out to your congressman and complain to them? I mean, the government makes the decisions. The administration's making decisions. I mean, that's what I would do here. So I'm assuming it's still a democracy. So you should, grassroots complain up the chain. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's several folks who are doing that. There's different things that are being organized for the in-home office week that's coming up here in March. So hopefully those voices will be heard. Great idea as well.
Certainly,
Catherine,
Nicole, we're getting attention. I mean, today we're speaking to the two-nation story. I mean, the Travel Alliance partnership that I've been part of for all of these years. We've always been members of OMCA. We're members of the American Bus Association. Another important entity is the National Tour Association. We're all speaking with a united voice, and a lot of our conferences go back and forth between countries. I think the National Tour Association's conference coming to Ottawa, our capital, this year. I mean, it just worked out that way in our scheduling. So to me, those are all important stories, that life is going on as usual within our tourism community. We understand the importance of travel in making us better people. And, I'm a better citizen of the world for my 36 years of travel. I understand a lot of those situations better. So we certainly don't want to have any thing fall back in that regard. I mean, so to me, I think the fact that our conferences, the conference for OMCA in the fall, will have a huge delegation as usual coming in from the US, or we certainly still expect that. I'm going to the conferences in the US. We need to keep the messaging out there that business needs to continue and we need to keep things rolling. We need these relationships to stay strong. And the only way to do that is, you know, sitting down, and sometimes it's having a meal or a bottle of beer or a glass of wine. But these conferences are very important, and our communication is very important.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add in too, with TBEX, we host 3 conferences a year. This year we have 1 conference in Quebec City and 1 in Wichita, Kansas, and we haven't thought about changing that. I think it's going to be more about moving ahead with events, but being mindful, you know, having these sorts of conversations beforehand to understand how we can help connect people, help get past this, and cut through some of these headlines and some of that fat, so to speak. But you know, for us, we're moving forward, and I think it's going to be a lot about what everyone else is saying, where it's going to be about continual monitoring. This is not going to be over tomorrow. We might get a new headline tomorrow that changes what we understand about something for the better or for the worse, and we'll work through this together. Our biggest mistake will be shutting down dialogue and communication, which is why I was, you know, felt fortunate to be a part of this, because that's what we're doing.
I appreciate that so much. Absolutely. Catherine, we do have a number of PR professionals as well as freelance writers that are tuning in, and I think they're wondering how should writers and PR professionals adjust their media pitches to editors in this current climate?
Well, depends on how long it goes on for, right? I guess we'd be looking at long lead type stories. Like, let's talk about next ski season, or I don't know what to say. Our readers are, they're upset. They're very dialed into what's happening. So yes, there's a lot of, we can all dialogue and we can talk all we want, but at the end of the day, you know, the Mandarins have been doing that for months and it still happened. So we're just trying to react and just write stories that will interest our readers. And I'm not saying it'll never, US stories are problematic right now, simply because if we're talking about the little guy and hurting the little guy, well, we've got a lot of little guys on the north side of the border that maybe we need to sort of direct people to vacation in Canada this year. And yet I still have a lot of stories that I'm waiting to run that are US based, and there's tons of material in the US that we still run and focus on, but we have to wait till the temperature dies down a bit. This is not a good time to be inflaming it right now.
It might be a great time, Catherine, to increase tourism to Canada. Tell us,
exactly,
Canadians, that we Americans love you. You're on sale. We're going to come and
exactly
fill your
40% off. Like, I mean, I never understand why Americans aren't here all the time. To be honest, it's like this place. But yeah, if it comes to PR pitching and all that kind of thing, like think long lead. Like, don't try and sell me a pitch for the spring. It's looking ahead, and it's also like there are still. I mean, if there's a big event coming, like, we still want to know about it. We just have to figure out, you know, is it worth going over the hurdle of public opinion right now in order to run it? So, and certainly the news. I mean, we're not like we're not running stories about US. We just ran this great piece about Jay Peak in Vermont, how Canadians are still going because they already have tickets, and like, why would we throw that money away? And there's a huge Quebec-Vermont connection, and Vermont basically feels like Canada sometimes. It's so that's a lot. You know, we're still doing that. We're still covering America. It's just I think the difference now is there are more news-based stories and less destination travel junkets that we've sent writers on and are writing about. So like, there's a lot of coverage, and it's not all negative. A lot of it is all these things that we're talking about here about stories and connection and family and all that good stuff. It's just so, you know, it's a bit of a mix right now.
Yeah. And Chris, just kind of adding on to that, as you are getting maybe pitches for you know, brand relationships or relationships with destinations, how will your partnerships change or evolve based on the sentiment?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, first I'm acknowledging that I have my ear tuned to everything. I'm following everything carefully, but, you know, I plan to move forward with US partnerships. And that's partially because my biggest site is 50% Canadian, 50% American. And my partnership ratio is about 50% Canadian, 50% American. So I'm kind of in between, you know, on those. I also, I mean, this is a different conversation altogether, but with the rise of AI and all this kind of stuff, I feel like as a creator, as a website owner, this is my time to really dive deep and share some narratives that I hope can combat some of the larger narratives, to try to offer some reprieve to that. I think also it depends on what am I writing on. On We Explore Canada and Ultimate Ontario, two of our sites, we're focusing heavily on Canada right now, and what you can do in your own backyard, exploring different spots you may not have thought about, but not at the expense of US necessarily. It's just about, kind of like Catherine was saying, ultimately you're at the behest of the readership and who's reading what. I think also, you know, for me, last week I was in Manitoba with two American creators and my partner Bree, and we had some of that content did really well because people weren't asking, are they Canadians, are they Americans? We were ice biking. That was the focus. Ice biking. Wow. That content, I think our collective social media post on ice biking had something like 1 million impressions. And in that sentiment, there were Americans and Canadians, and none of them were saying, you know, down with Canada, down with America. They were saying, oh, it's great, you're all together ice biking. And so if we can get to that, I know it's a long road, but, you know, as far as, to answer your question more succinctly, I'm not going to be adjusting the way that I'm moving forward with partnerships in the US, because I've had part of the way I've built my career with partnerships with my American colleagues who I deeply respect, and I will work with them to help tell different narratives, and to, you know, that are still true to my brand.
Right, that gives us something really to think about, right? To focus on the actual experience itself and not necessarily about the Canadian or American or where it is. It's more, this is a really cool experience. Where do I have to go to have it? Right, it's very unique.
Yeah. I mean, the number one comment was is this the Rideau Canal? And I was like, it's not. It's the Assiniboine. That's just a little plug for Winnipeg there, but no one wants to go to Winnipeg in winter apparently. But you know what? We showed a different side of Winterpeg last week, and you know, all hail Manitoba. So I think there's some ways to have fun with this. I mean, I do want to say too, I don't think you need to focus on these things at the expense of some of these larger narratives. It's not as if I'm not paying attention to what's going on, but I'm also paying attention to what is going on here. The way that we were, you know, the server at the restaurant we were at last night, she was amazing and took great care of us, and she's an aspiring cellist, and we had a great conversation with her about building enough income to chase her career and opening up a cello-based bar and all that kind of stuff. There was no talk there. She knew we were Canadian, but we didn't say, hey, I'm Canadian, you're American. Can we start talking about your cello career? I mean, I think these are bridges. I just point that out just because it felt impactful to me.
Absolutely, such a great point. So Corey, as a border community, what strategies are you implementing and what are you seeing work?
Thanks, Nicole. It's pretty much what we've been hearing everybody here, which is we're making a shift toward face-to-face and actually having conversations with people internally and externally. Internally, we received outreach from elected officials on the Canadian side saying, can you please connect me with my American counterparts? And so we've had a role in that, which is more of a discussion about the evolving role of DMOs in the world. But externally, I'm looking at our tactics. You know, to Chris's point, we don't have the loudest microphone. In fact, most of our destinations are not at a budget standpoint that they're going to drown out Washington, Ottawa, Queens Park. So we've been modifying tactics, right? And so some things that are a bit more static, we've had to work on remessaging, whether that's paid media or something that opens up a forum like social media. You know, remessaging there, and frankly, leaning into things such as PR, sales missions, reverse fam tours, where we can actually have a conversation with somebody, because we are a bit unique in our destination. We have a long history of saying, look, you know, come to my destination, you can see the boat castle, which is over this shoulder. That's on a U.S. island, but you can also, on your trip, then take a helicopter tour out of Gananoque, Ontario, up the islands. And we've always packaged it that way. And so for us, it's really about this kind of stuff, having a conversation with somebody, because at the root of what we do here in travel is hospitality. and that's welcoming people and making them feel welcome. Yes, I happen to come from a destination and represent a destination where it's a little special. We have a shared economy here and a shared culture and sociability, but that exists wherever you are, that you are here to welcome somebody in. And so we've looked to pivot to a little bit more face-to-face. I understand that the return on our investment on some tactics is probably going to go down this year in terms of Canadian market, for example, for our American product. I think you're going to have to live through that. You're going to have to survive that. That's a lot better off than abandoning the market completely, which I don't think any of us would recommend, and really finding ways that you can tell your story in a lot more direct manner with somebody.
Corey, I think you have an actual interesting perspective. You have an interesting area because you literally are right on the border, and you can take a boat across the border. I think that's actually, you should call me. I think that's actually an interesting story. What's happening?
I like it. You found a
There we
story
go.
right here. Perfect.
It's a great. I went up into the Thousand Islands.
We're headed to Thousand Islands in a couple months, by the way, too. We've been having that conversation for a while, partially because of that story as well. So, you know,
Wonderful.
this is why we have these discussions.
That's
Well, I
think-
absolutely why. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a speed round because Camille, I'm assuming there might be some questions in the chat, and we can do a round robin on what advice do you have for the travel sector on both sides of the border, and we'll do a little round robin, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to answer a couple of questions. So let's start with Vince. What advice do you have for the travel sector on both sides of the border?
All right, I have 3 points really. One, I think we've all touched on it. Stay invested. This is it's long term. This is a rough patch. You disinvest when markets are low, like your own personal investments. You're not going to be sad when they go back up. So stay invested is number one. Be sensitive to the consumer and your partners, no matter what political stripes we wear. This isn't about politics. This is about being good partners. And so, you know, having that sensitivity about how partners are feeling and how consumers are feeling is going to be really important to building you know, equity in your brands. And then lastly, participate and support the associations that are out there that are working hard every day to build group travel. So, you know, if that's a membership in American Association and Nicole's organization, mine, whatever it takes, work with us to help build out our sector, because that's what we do every day, is to help you guys make sure that you have visitors arriving, that your brand's in front of people, and that we're building out our segment of the visitor economy the best we can.
Great, love it. Richard.
Well, Vince, you could not have said, those are my items. You could not have said it any better. I think I've been trying to, you know, tourism is kind of the equalizer. And to Chris's comment earlier, when we get together, we're talking about great travel destinations. We're not talking American, Canadian. We're talking about great travel destinations. We need to keep moving that direction. And certainly from a Canadian perspective, I'm excited because we have one of the best gems in the world. I often sell it as the Alaska of the East with Newfoundland and Labrador. And I would say if it's not on someone's bucket list, it should be. So this may be the great time to come. We're still not crowded, great authentic experiences. So a little plug for Atlantic Canada, but you know, our coastal communities, you know, if you live in St. Stephen, New Brunswick, or Calais, Maine, you know, half of your family's probably married to someone across the bridge. So, you know, to me, those communities are still alive and vibrant, and that needs to be our messaging, is we need to be ready for when our challenges are extinguished. And, you know, in life, there's always going to be another challenge around the corner. But I think this one is correctable, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for sure.
Absolutely. Catherine, how about you? Advice for both sides of the border?
Well, I think in the U.S., I would continue to pressure your congressman or congresswoman to explain what you're going through and why this is not working for you. What else can you do? For ours, otherwise it's patience, right? It's just patience, hanging in there and hanging on, because you know, the news changes from day to day, month to month, and let's hope that the tariffs are ending ASAP.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, final thought?
Yeah, so some of what was said was on my list too, which is probably a good sign that you chose a good panel. But the things that I would say, number one, remember the larger narrative here. We live in a world that forces us to live minute by minute. I would say take actions to make positive ripples where you can. And the final thing that I would say would be to be present but patient. This is not going to finish overnight, but you also need to know what's going on. And the final thing I will say is add to the narrative with your voice, but not to the circus.
Nice line.
Very good one. And Corey, final thoughts, advice?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I would say, hone in on your truths, right? There are communities in the state of Maine where the gas pumps are written in French. There are communities in my destination that have Victoria Day weekend kickoffs this summer and May 2 for weekends. Lean into those things that you truly are, right? You're not manufacturing a reason for people to visit. You're leaning into it, and that demonstrates how important it is to your community to welcome those visitors. My other bit is be opportunistic. Every situation, good or bad, provides some sort of an opportunity. And if I'm managing a museum or I have some sort of attraction that has a tie that tells a good story, if I'm managing a Hall of Fame and there's a Canadian player, but that Hall of Fame is located in the state, reach out and find out, do their values align with yours? And can that become an ambassador for you to help carry that message, which really is that we would like you to visit just as much as we want to feel welcome when we go visit on your side.
Great advice. I love it. That was a great rapid round. Camille, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, we have a few. I do want to mention the question always comes in, are we recording? Yes, we are recording. We would love for you to share this with your colleagues. Like Nicole said at the beginning, this is a community conversation, and this is the beginning of it, not the beginning and end. There's a few comments in here, and I'll share those with the panelists after the session, but question here, on both sides of the border, is this more a question of hurt feelings or of higher costs and tariffs?
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
How can you separate those?
Yeah, you can't. They're entwined. It's 100% both.
That's why we have hurt feelings.
I think a lot of it is, up until this morning, has been that hurt feelings piece, right? A legitimate, negative sentiment, and the policy as of this morning has now reflected that piece. But the rhetoric leapfrogged the policy for the last 30 days, and now it's here, and that's caused that negative sentiment, rightly so. So we're kind of on one, and we're getting to the other very quickly.
And I would say that, for a lay Canadian or American, what does this mean? People have been asking me from a tourism, does that mean your trips are going to be 25% more expensive or whatever? To me, there's certain industries that are being hurt, and that's where the costs are going to go. But eventually those water down to all of us. But I think there's a lot of unknown, specifically to our industry of what this means, other than the hurt feeling end of it at this point. But that's going to present itself in the coming weeks for sure.
I would say more than hurt feeling. I think it's the sovereignty play that is that's really what it is, like the erasing of the border kind of thing. Like as if, just flip the script. Like imagine if it was us coming after you. Like imagine the reaction there. So.
Absolutely. Okay, another question, Camille?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. I'm trying to sift through everything here. This is an interesting one. Could this all have an impact on other international inbound traffic to the U.S. beyond Canadians? The world is watching, and there may be other boycotts on U.S. travel as a result.
Well, I think there's certainly a bit of that in the news, but it's so reactive. To me, just the whole Ukraine situation, and that's a different angle that's gone that direction the last little bit, and being disrespectful to other nations and other world leaders. I think, you know, I'm hearing a bit of that, is that overall, how Canada is being treated is being watched, and I guess could present in a different way from other countries as well.
Here's another question. Is there an existing framework or good example for what a promotional sister DMO program could look like? Would this type of industry solidarity be helpful or look too much like a polarizing resistance?
Like a sister cities, but sister DMOs?
I guess so.
Interesting.
I mean, just kind of like what Corey was saying before. I mean, I think a lot of these questions, we're not going to have bullet point answers as much as it's going to take some communication and dialogue, and we're going to need to build things back out. I mean, the reality is that while I may not feel a tremendous amount of trust on a administrative level, I have a lot of people in my life from the US that I work with who I have tremendous trust and faith in. I'm continuing to have those conversations. They're continuing to have those conversations. If there's one thing I would say, is that the worst mistake we can make is to reflect what's happening on a political level in our personal and professional lives. Let's keep those dialogues open, because the reality is that if we're talking about borders and tightening borders, well, that usually is a sign of it's time to open communication.
I think Chris's message has been heeded, you know, already. One of the silver linings to this is that I think conversations in my destination between Americans, Canadians, whether those are tourism offices, chambers of commerce, elected officials, is probably more frequent and heavier and stronger right now than it was 6 months ago, 6 years ago. And so there's a recognition there that that's going to be required, and for folks to keep in touch, because I agree that I think we're a long way at the local level from what are the national headlines.
Well, maybe one more question, Camille, if there is one.
Yes. This might be technical, but are there any specific tariffs you know of related to travel that are causing maybe some more direct travel concerns?
Well, one of the things that, as we've chatted today, that really resonate with me is group tour market, which is my market predominantly, tends to be an older clientele, a retired clientele that spend far too much time on the news. You know, it wraps around, it doesn't change a lot every hour. And I mean, sometimes they're the ones that, they're a very important market for us, but they're the ones that will wash their hands. I'm just not going to travel anymore. They get very set in their opinion of this treatment. So I do have some concerns on the group side because of all of that constant negative narrative. Like, you know, when I go to visit my mom, turn off that TV. Like, you've just watched this probably for 14 hours rolling in your house, and you're getting angrier about it. So those kind of things, I think, need to be put in perspective. You know, that isn't the real story, or it's part of the story, let's say, but not. There's a lot of people hurting in every corner of each of our countries from some of this stuff, and we have to, you know, get our rhetoric in the right place and think about it from that perspective. So it is concerning.
I think the trickle down for the travel category would be as it relates to like Vince at ABA. I know you and ABA and the Motorcoach Association for the US stood up and talked about how this can impact the cost of actual buses.
Yeah, the tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs from Canada are going to raise costs of goods, and Canada has a big long list. In fact, I just got the new list, and it's thousands of products long. And the US has a blanket tariff on all Canadian goods. So, you know, if you enjoy a Canadian beer in a bar in the US, it's going to be more expensive. If you travel by bus or plane or train over time, it's going to be more expensive. It will hit consumers pretty quickly, but booking a trip is not more expensive. like there's no extra tariff on taking money on either side of the border and having experiences. But that steak that you eat might come from Alberta. And if you're somewhere in the US near Alberta, and it's going to be more expensive. So those are the things that are going to have consumers realize the impact sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. And we've ended almost on time. We went over by just 1 minute, so I'm really impressed. But I know I learned a lot from all of you. I took a bunch of notes, and I hope our attendees did as well. And I'm just really grateful for you spending this hour with us today, and hope to keep the conversations going. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.